Okay, we had a little technical difficulty. The recorder shut down, so here's part two. We'll just pick up where we left off. We said that sheep go astray as individuals, but we also find that more often than not, sheep go astray in groups. And that relates to us in this way. Sometimes it's easy for us to be swept away with the crowd. I mean, we can be swayed by current trends in clothing, hairstyles, automobiles, houses, entertainment, you name it. So if that's the case, is it any wonder that we're also tempted toward those things that we know are wrong? I know we usually attribute peer pressure to children and teenagers, but hey, if we admit it, adults are also susceptible to outside pressures that can lead them astray as well. So the question, I guess, is why do we do these things? Well, sheep go astray because they ignore the voice of the shepherd. I mean, whatever the immediate reason, the basic reason for their going astray is because they lose track of the shepherd's voice. And as humans, we too are found guilty of ignoring the voice of the good shepherd. We know the value of his voice. We're often allured astray by the voices of men. So we're tempted just like sheep are tempted, and we sin as we go astray. As we look at that, we have to understand that we suffer the consequences of disobedience, just as sheep suffer the consequences of disobedience. The greatest consequence, I guess, for sheep that have gone astray is to be lost from the flock, to be left unprotected and out of the caring hand of the shepherd. And it's the same way for us as mankind. The worst predicament that we ever faced is being lost. It's the natural state of man before they trust the good shepherd to care for them. Before we come to Jesus, we are lost. Remember, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. We're spiritually dislocated at that point. We're no use for God in that state. We're spiritually exposed to our enemies. We're left unprotected and in danger of spiritual disaster. And the temptations that seem so promising have only led us further and further away from the only one that can help us if we'll just listen to his voice. We'll suffer the consequences of our disobedience, though. But it doesn't have to be that way. So we have a need that we have sinned. But in the same verse that we found that need in Isaiah 53:6, we find the remedy. There it says, all we like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. But, there's that wonderful but. There's something better. But, the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. Talking about that suffering servant, that one to come, the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And we know as we look at that Jesus Christ suffered for us. Love and action from start to finish. God himself at work in Jesus Christ, who freely gave his life for us. In fact, in John 10:18, he says, no one has taken it from me, but I lay it down on my own initiative. For I have the authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This commandment I received from my Father. So it was love that surrendered itself to the very worst that sin could do. Remember reading in 2 Corinthians 5:21 how the one who knew no sin took sin upon himself that we might become righteous before God. John Calvin said it this way, he endured in his soul the dreadful torments of a condemned and lost man. That condemned and lost man was you. It was me. Remember, this was the sinless Son of God. He didn't deserve any of this, but he did it willingly for you and I. This truly was love in action. So we see that Christ suffered for us, and by his sufferings, Christ made it possible for our deliverance from sin to become, because he was nailed to a cross. In order to be able to see the perils of temptation, we have to look at them in light of the cross. If we're going to see the heinousness of sin, we have to look at it in light of the cross. If we're going to see the catastrophe of being lost, we have to see it in light of the cross. Isaac Watts understood that completely. Listen to what he said in this well-known hymn. He says, when I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride. Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my God. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice to his blood. See from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did e'er such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown? Then he says in that last verse, were the whole realm of nature mine, that were a present far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. Let me illustrate that for you in a modern day illustration. And think about it. Do you see the cross that way this morning? Do we really understand the impact of Christ's suffering in our place? Let me close with this story. There was a small boy who was consistently coming home late from school. I mean, he was mischievous. If he could get in trouble, he got in trouble. Mom says you need to be home every day by this time so you have time to do your homework so you can be ready for supper. But nevertheless, he was late. As he got later and later each day, the parents had finally had enough. On this particular day, he arrived later than he'd ever arrived, and his mother met him at the door. But she didn't say anything. She just looked at him. That mom look, you know. His father met him in the living room. Didn't say a word. He just looked at him. Then at dinner that night, as the boy came and sat down, he looked at the table and he looked at his plate, and there was one slice of bread and a glass of water. He looked over at his dad's plate, piled up with meat, potatoes, vegetables, iced tea. Nice meal. As he looked at his dad didn't say a word. The boy was crushed. Here he had a slice of bread and water, and man, Dad had a feast. So the dad sat there quietly, and he let that sink into the boy's mind for a minute. And then without even saying a word, he reached over and he took the boy's plate and he replaced it with his plate. He took the slice of bread and the glass of water and gave the boy the plate full of meat and potatoes and vegetables, gave him his tea. Never said a word, just smiled at the boy. Years later, after that boy had grown to be a man, he tells that story. And he says, all my life, I've known what God is like by what my father did that night. Folks, that's what Jesus did for us when he went to the cross. He didn't deserve anything. He didn't deserve any punishment. He'd never sinned. But we had. He took our place. Vicarious suffering. Suffering on behalf of someone else for something that you didn't do. Aren't you glad Jesus did that for you? If you've never come to the point where you've asked Christ to forgive you of your sins, he wants to forgive you of those sins. That's why he died on that cross. All you got to do is call upon his name in prayer. Tell him that you love him. Tell him that you believe he died for you. Confess that you're